I never thought we'd have to do this." Those were the first words my father said after 10 years of silence. For a moment, I just stared at him. The last time we'd spoken, he had told me to clear out my office and leave the company. Now he was sitting across from me in a quiet coffee shop, looking like he hadn't slept in weeks. Then he slid a folder across the table. I opened it. Within seconds, I understood why he had called. The family business was in trouble, serious trouble. And somehow, after 10 years of pretending I didn't exist, they needed my help. But before we start today's story, please subscribe to the channel and like this video. My name is Ryan Mitchell, and I'm 39 years old. My grandfather started Mitchell Equipment Supply nearly 50 years ago. What began as a small warehouse eventually grew into a respected regional company that supplied industrial equipment to construction firms and manufacturing plants. Growing up, I practically lived there. I spent summers cleaning warehouses, organizing inventory, and helping drivers load trucks. I loved the business, not because of the money, because it felt like something worth building. My younger brother Brandon wasn't interested in any of that, at least not when we were young. While I was working weekends, Brandon was usually out with friends. He wasn't lazy, just different. He was outgoing, funny, and naturally good with people. Everyone liked him, especially our father. As adults, we both joined the company. I handled operations, purchasing, inventory management, vendor contracts, the behind-the-scenes work that kept everything running. Brandon worked in sales. To be fair, he was actually good at it. Clients enjoyed talking to him. He brought in new business. But running a company required more than charm, or at least I thought it did. By the time I turned 29, I had spent 7 years helping modernize the business. I introduced inventory software, reduced waste, improved delivery efficiency. Profits increased year after year. Most employees assumed I would eventually become CEO. Honestly, so did I. Then my father announced his retirement plans. A few months later, he called a family meeting. I walked into that meeting expecting a discussion. Instead, I got a decision. My father stood at the head of the table. "I've chosen Brandon to take over as president of the company." The room fell silent. I honestly thought he was joking. Then I looked around. Nobody was laughing. My heart sank. I looked at Brandon. Even he seemed surprised. "Dad," I said carefully, "are you serious?" "Yes." "Why?" His answer changed my life. "Because leadership is about people, and Brandon connects with people better than you do." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. 7 years of work. 7 years of sacrifice. Reduced to one sentence. I tried arguing, tried explaining. But the decision had already been made. Nothing I said mattered. After the meeting, several managers privately told me they thought the decision was a mistake. But nobody challenged my father, including Brandon. That hurt almost as much as the decision itself. Over the next year, things became increasingly frustrating. Brandon was promoted. I was expected to train him. Whenever he made mistakes, I fixed them. Whenever problems appeared, I solved them. And somehow he received the credit. Then came the contract that changed everything. A major supplier offered us an expansion opportunity. It looked attractive on paper. Brandon wanted to sign immediately. I spent days reviewing the details. The numbers didn't make sense. The risks were enormous. I advised against it, strongly. But Brandon ignored me. So did my father. They signed the deal. Less than a year later, the project failed. The company lost nearly $2 million. It was the largest financial mistake in company history. I assumed my father would finally recognize the problem. Instead, he blamed market conditions. Then he blamed the economy. Then he blamed bad luck. Anyone except Brandon. That's when I realized the truth. This wasn't about qualifications. It never had been. My father had already chosen his favorite. Facts didn't matter. Results didn't matter. Nothing mattered. A few months later, I was called into a meeting with HR. The second I walked into the room, I knew something was wrong. My father couldn't even look at me. There was a folder waiting on the table. Inside was a restructuring plan. According to the document, my position was being eliminated. I stared at the page, then at my father. "You're firing me? It's a business decision." "No," I replied. "It's a family decision." Nobody said a word, because everyone knew I was right. I packed my office that same afternoon. 20 minutes. That's how long it took to raise 10 years of my life. As I carried the final box to my car, Brandon ran outside. For a second, I thought he might stop me. Apologize. Explain. Instead, he said something I'll never forget. "You'll be okay." I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was unbelievable. I looked at him and said, "The problem isn't losing the job. The problem is realizing who my family really is." Then I got in my car and drove away. For the next 10 years, I barely spoke to any of them. At first, I was angry. Then I was hurt. Eventually, I stopped caring. I accepted a management position at another company. The pay was lower. The title was smaller. But nobody treated me like I was invisible. Within 3 years, I became a regional director. 5 years later, I helped launch a consulting firm that specialized in supply chain efficiency. The business grew faster than we expected. By the 8th year, we were advising companies across multiple states. For the first time in my life, my success belonged entirely to me. Not my father, not my brother, me. Then one morning, 10 years after I left, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I hadn't seen in years. My father. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered. What he said next made me pull my car to the side of the road. We need to talk. And for the first time in 10 years, he sounded scared. 3 days later, I met my father at a coffee shop. The confident man I remembered was gone. He looked older, smaller somehow. After a few minutes of awkward silence, he handed me a financial report. The numbers were ugly. Revenue had fallen for 4 consecutive years. Debt had nearly doubled. 3 major clients had left. Several expansion projects were losing money. The company wasn't bankrupt, but it was heading in that direction. What happened? I asked. My father sighed. We made mistakes. That was probably the most honest thing he'd ever said to me. As I reviewed the report, one pattern became obvious. Many of the company's worst decisions traced back to the same source. Rapid expansion, poor oversight, optimistic forecasts, risky investments. All approved under Brandon's leadership. I wasn't surprised. What surprised me was how long it had taken everyone else to notice. A week later, I agreed to meet the family. Walking back into company headquarters felt strange. The building looked familiar, but it no longer felt like home. Inside the conference room sat my parents, several executives, and Brandon. Nobody smiled. Nobody knew what to say. Finally, Brandon spoke. I owe you an apology. I looked at him. For years, I had imagined this moment. Now that it was happening, it felt different than I expected. I should have stood up for you, he continued. I knew you deserved that position. The room became silent. My father stared at the table. My mother wiped away tears. Brandon took a deep breath. The truth is, I spent years trying to prove Dad made the right choice. Every mistake made me double down instead of admitting I needed help. For the first time, I believed him. Not because of his words, because of the look on his face. He looked exhausted, defeated, like someone who had spent years carrying a weight he could no longer hold. Then my father spoke. I failed both of my sons. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. I put Brandon in a position he wasn't ready for, and I pushed away the son who had earned it. Hearing those words should have felt satisfying. Instead, it felt sad, because the damage had already been done. 10 years had passed, missed birthdays, missed holidays, missed opportunities, things nobody could get back. Eventually, they asked the question I'd been expecting. Would I help save the company? I thought about it carefully. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I wasn't willing to sacrifice my life for people who had already discarded me once. Finally, I answered. Yes, but only under certain conditions. The room immediately became attentive. No family members in executive roles unless they're qualified. Nobody argued. Independent financial oversight. Again, no arguments. Major business decisions require board approval. Everyone nodded. And one more thing. My father looked up. If I'm going to help, we stop pretending the past never happened. That condition was harder than all the others combined. But eventually, everyone agreed. Over the next 18 months, I worked as an outside consultant. The process wasn't glamorous. There were no miracles, no overnight turnarounds, just hard work, careful planning, difficult decisions. Several failing projects were shut down. Debt was reduced. Operations were streamlined. Former clients slowly returned. Little by little, the company stabilized. Then it started growing again. One afternoon, nearly 2 years later, the company held its annual employee meeting. Hundreds of workers gathered inside the warehouse. During the presentation, my father unexpectedly stepped onto the stage. He looked out at the crowd. Then he looked at me. For a moment, I had no idea what he was about to say. Then he picked up the microphone. Many years ago, I made the biggest mistake of my career. The entire room became quiet. I ignored the person most qualified to lead. I froze. My father wasn't a man who admitted mistakes publicly. Ever, he continued. And because of my pride, I nearly destroyed both my company and my family. The room was completely silent. Then he pointed toward me. The reason this company still exists today is because someone chose to help us when he had every reason to walk away. For the first time in my life, my father gave me the recognition I had spent years chasing. And strangely enough, I no longer needed it. Because somewhere along the way, I had built a life that didn't depend on his approval. Today, the company is stable. My consulting business continues to grow. And while my relationship with my family will never be perfect, it's better than I ever expected. The greatest lesson I learned is that being rejected doesn't mean you're not valuable. Sometimes people fail to see your worth because they're blinded by their own biases. And when that happens, the best thing you can do isn't prove them wrong. It's keep moving forward. Because success built on your own terms is worth far more than recognition that arrives too late. What would you have done if you were in my position? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoy stories filled with drama, suspense, and shocking twists, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload.